Hey guys, Kian here, and this is probably going to be my first video in over a year. So last year I ended up switching jobs, and I've been working at a new job now for the last couple months, and things have settled down to the point where I can get back into ignoring reality again. So that's where I am now. And I guess what I want to work on now, or my next focus for this year, is going to be working on Mega Man Legends 2, since we've managed to get most of the content from Mega Man Legends 1 exported. Most, if not all, at this point. So I'm going to work on Mega Man Legends 2, and rather than just kind of the most successful approach I found with Mega Man Legends 1 was just to end up using a save state because I had all the relationships with everything loaded into memory, and then I could kind of build on top of what the devs already had done in game. And in this case, I kind of want to keep improving my tools and keep trying different approaches to constantly see what works, how it works, and to try and make better tools. So, um, the approach I'm going to take for Mega Man Legends 2 is I think I want to slice things up and get them down into their original files. So the way Mega Man Legends is set up is there's an EBD file, which is an entity. It's a collection of entities, and an entity is basically an enemy, bullets, explosions that are used inside the level. So the game will load in a level or a stage, and then it'll have different scenes for that stage, like scene A, scene B, scene C, scene D. And as the game switches stages, it'll have all the entities needed. Like, so it'll have like, okay, this character is here, this character is here, this character is here. It'll have Hiroko, it'll have the different enemies, and those are all loaded into this uh, entity collection file. And then A, B, C, D, and then that's the same for all of these different scenarios. So if the if different characters, if you do something in the game and an event happens and different characters now populate that same stage, it'll move from the A scenario to the B scenario, and it loads like 90% of the same data. Like if it just switches one character, like it'll have all the same characters except that one character will be different or one character will be added. So it's a pretty wasteful approach, but I think they can get away with it because I have so much space on the CD compared with how much space the assets take up. What problem that presents for me is just because if there's so much duplicated, um, you know, it creates two problems for me because first it creates a bunch of duplicated entities all over the place. When I only want one of each entity, I only want to export one of each entity type, and the second thing is it kind of um, Mega Man doesn't have, or PlayStation doesn't have texture names, which is a huge issue. If you have like a Dreamcast or if you have the Dreamcast or GameCube or anything from that generation on, textures are going to have texture names. So when you load a file, it's going to have a texture name, and then that's gonna pair it. The way PlayStation works is it has a frame buffer and it loads all the textures into the frame buffer and it says, hey, and then it just gives you coordinates to the frame buffer to say, hey, give me this texture and give me this palette and render that to this face. And that's how it works. And so it's very hard to kind of figure out which texture is going to be applied to which face until you actually see which file gets loaded into the game. So I think what I'm going to try to do for these two problems is I'm going to try and slice up all the files. So these entity lists, what I'm going to try and do is each entity list will have a number of entities that are in that scene. And then I'll say, here's an ID for the mesh. Here's the mesh. Here's the bones, and here's the animations if they exist. They'll always have an ID and they'll always have a mesh. They may not have bones and they may not have animations. And then there'll just be a list of and they're kind of offset, and that'll just happen for the number of entities that get declared in the entity collection, pretty much. And then from there, the first mesh will kind of start as soon as the list ends. So what I'm going to try and do is go through these, find each unique ID, and go to the mesh, slice that out of the archive file, and then put that into its own file. And then for the same thing for the bones, go down to the bones, slice that, put that into its own file. If there are animations, go down there, slice that, grab the animations, and put that into their own file. And what I think I can do by that is create a unique list of meshes, um, and then bones from each mesh, and then animations for each mesh. Animations, before I get to animations, and I think what I can do is scan through the mesh. There'll be offset issues because it's the pointers are going to be relative to the start of this file as opposed to the start of this. But I think I should be able to figure out where the pointers are located inside this file, and then update them to be relative to the start of the file that I slice out, as opposed to be to relative to the start of this. But I think I can also store a copy of where I sliced it out if I need to do anything or recover anything. And so that should give me a unique list of meshes. And then inside the meshes, what I can also probably do is go through and look at the textures and say, this has texture coordinates and palette coordinates. This expects 2 or 3 textures, and then it's looking at the coordinates here, and then it's looking for the texture here. And at first, these are just being coordinates, but I think if I am able to go through, if these are saved as their own thing, as their own unique thing, I should be able to find, we should be able to go through and say, oh, this is stage 3, and then look through the textures for stage 3, and then be able to pair those, find a method to pair those later on if we have something to connect to, rather than trying to just do that all on the fly. So I can go through, scan this, export these out into their own thing, have these connections kind of hanging to say, hey, these need to be connected at some time later on, and then sometime later on we can go through, connect this to the file, so that when you go and click and actually load and render the animation, all it has to do is go through, read these, and grab the animation. So, and the textures to some degree, I'm actually do the same thing. Rather than trying to render them on the fly, I can probably render them out into images, have palettes already as palettes, so that rather than trying to go through and do this all in binary, I'll have some kind of intermediate format that I can work with and debug and update and scan through, and to try and get these things working. So I think that's going to be the approach that I'm going to use this time. In terms of tools, I'm kind of behind on web development tools because I've mostly just been looking at binary whenever I get the chance. So I'm going to use TypeScript and React. There's a couple of weird wonky things that I'm not used to right now, like my viewport isn't, this should be scrollable. It's not scrollable. For 3JS, this is being done in React, which is kind of weird because it throws away everything I know about 3JS. And I think this was supposed to like automatically resize and do the viewport and have those events already managed, but it's not doing that. So I don't know. I might throw this away and just use 3JS directly myself. But I'll try playing around with tools and see what approaches, see what works. And then in terms of setup, I think I'm going to have, rather than going through stages and having to look through the files, if I slice everything out and get everything ahead of time, I should be able to kind of do things in categories. So first I'm going to start with the entities because that's the easiest place to get traction and kind of start filling out these relationships. And so entities might be subdivided into characters and explosions and bullets. Later, if I'm able to find which flags the game uses for IDs and identify those correctly. But for right now, I'll just throw everything in one place. And then kind of click here and then load the model and then display the model is what I'm looking at, and I'll kind of tweak the UI things. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. So right now what I'm doing is I'm importing the game files and then scanning through them and then looking for the entities. And now I'm to the point of going through the entity collections, and I'm starting to slice those out, and I'm going to put those as their own file. So I'll give you a new update in another video when I have more updates. And this is Keon signing out.